First Person is produced in cooperation with the Far East Broadcasting Company, who rejoice in the stories of changed lives through the power of Jesus Christ. Learn more at febc.org.
And the reason we're trying to strive for excellence is because of our faith. I think it reflects directly on the Lord and our belief and our adherence to Him and our love for Him that we are trying to be excellent at what we do.
And we'll pursue that thought about excellence in our Christian calling now as you meet Douglas Shaw on this edition of First Person. Welcome, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Doug is a business CEO who has helped raise hundreds of millions of dollars for causes including homelessness, education, health, international aid, Bible translation, and Christian broadcasting. Before I introduce you to our guest, though, I encourage you to explore the archive of past first-person interviews you'll find at firstpersoninterview.com. There are hundreds in the list now, and each tell a story of faith in Christ and Christian calling. So please visit us at firstpersoninterview.com. Our guest this week, Doug Shaw, is the chairman and CEO of Douglas Shaw and Associates, a firm specializing in helping nonprofits grow and stay true to their mission. His latest book, Curative Culture, is all about avoiding the creation of a toxic workplace. As we began our conversation, Doug told me about his humble start in life in the state of Washington.
I think I didn't realize how humble until I got to college and would sit around and talk with people in the evenings, and they'd say, "What? you grew up in a Boeing packing crate?" And
literally, yeah.
Oh, literally. Yeah. Well, it was a Boeing aircraft packing crate for big airplane parts, and my dad had taken it and shaped it into a 25 by 25 cabin. And he and I'd worked together on that.
Yeah.
And there were a family of 6 living there, yes.
Well, I know you feel richer for that experience, don't you?
Oh, I do. For me, it wasn't out of the ordinary at the time. It certainly sounds rather pioneer-like now in terms of erecting your own home and having an outhouse and not having electricity or running water. Those things are not most of our experiences these days.
Yeah, certainly not. But I identify with that. We did have electricity, but
Yes.
we didn't have the indoor plumbing that you didn't have. So
Yes.
I know some of what you speak.
Yes.
It really is humbling, and it's good to look back and see how the Lord used that to prepare you now for the life that you've lived, a life of service.
You know, and I really think that I remember lying on my stomach in that little cabin reading about all these famous people like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington Carver, and just several people, great people in the life of our country, and reading about their humble beginnings. And it made me come away with a sense of expectation that maybe there was something more for me.
Yeah, yeah.
It gave me a sense of maybe looking ahead in opportunity.
Well, this will come up in our conversation, I believe, ahead here, because we're going to talk about your book, Curative Culture, stepping away from a toxic workplace. But I also want to mention that you are the founder, of course, the owner of Douglas Shaw and Associates. What is the company that you founded? I know, but I want our listeners to know.
Yeah, sure, of course. Thank you. Douglas Shaw and Associates, I founded it just over 31 years ago now. It is a company that's dedicated to raising money through direct response, which is largely direct mail, online giving, and on air. And we serve a variety of ministries, over 300 ministries over the last 3 decades. And thankfully, we're very fortunate to be able to say we raise hundreds of millions of dollars every year for those ministries.
Right. It's a terrific story. It's a great company, and I've benefited from your generosity as well, Doug. So thank you for that. It'll be important that we state that because your book, Curative Culture, talks about what it's like to be a part of a company and to lead a company, but also to work in a company. And you talk about this in your book. First of all, what is a curative culture? How do you define it?
Well, it began with me looking at, everybody seems to know the word toxic.
Yeah.
You can say, hey, you don't want to work over there. That place is toxic. We don't really need much definition there. People know that. But I was looking for a one-word antonym when I started thinking of writing this book. It took me a long time to land on the word curative, which is from the Latin curare, meaning to cure or heal.
Mm-hmm.
And it stayed with me because I was thinking about my own work experiences and what I've noticed in consulting for so many organizations over the years that workplaces that exhibit a spirit of hopefulness and opportunity, and also a sense of really looking at the human side of each of us as we are at work. We're not just worker bees. We are there as human beings. But it's really influenced, for me, curative culture is really influenced by Genesis, where it talks about on day 6, the Imago Dei. He created us in his own image. And when I think about how God created each of us in his own image, it highly impacts how I want to look at my coworkers, even those that I don't like.
Yeah. Repeatedly in the book, you ask the question, do I want them to succeed? Do I want this person to succeed?
And that's an important question. And there's times when I find myself saying no as a leader. I'm exasperated with someone, and we've had corrective action and things haven't gone well. But then I have to ask myself the question, have I done everything I can to help this person succeed? And I think that's part of the life's blood of a curative culture, is where a leader will actually say that. Do I want them to succeed?
But as I read the book, I was thinking this isn't just for leaders. This is for anyone who's a part of any group that works together. That's
really true. It is certainly for leaders, but it is for anyone in an organization that would aspire to be a leader, but also anyone who knows that they're in a situation that they can have an impact on.
Sure.
Now, I do believe it is the leader that sets the tone. I have no question about that. In fact, I've seen and experienced in my own life the trying to impact a culture that was not really very curative in nature, in fact, toxic, and knowing that I could not only move the ball so far. But it does give me hope to have a sense of what does a curative culture look like. And I think anybody can relate to that, whether it's a spouse or one of your children that's working in a toxic culture. It'd be nice to have a description of what they could possibly be looking for.
But it also applies to the staff person because they are a part of creating that culture that you write about as well. You can't lead if nobody follows, right?
Absolutely. And I choose in the book to call them coworkers as opposed to employees.
There you go. Okay.
I think any leader can't lead if people aren't following, as you say. And people who experience the healing nature of a curative culture, they begin to take it on, and I've seen this in my own company. They take it on and start to say, hey, we don't do things like that around here. Let's not do that. Or here's how we do things. And it becomes a community of hope and opportunity where people start to realize, you know what? We do things a little differently here. We're going to look at the human side of who we are in this process. And I do speak about family of origin and how important that is in this process. I know you and I were talking a little bit about that ourselves, our own families of origin. And I think every single one of us in the workplace brings with them really who they were raised to be and their life experiences. And we are not always our best selves, as we all know. And when we come to work and we're not being our best self, that's when it really starts to show up. And so as we all come together, we are a conglomeration of a whole bunch of family of origin stories. Whether we're from a faith background or not faith background, whether we've been in a situation where we've been burned by somebody or we have mistrust, and we carry that into the workplace. So I think family of origin really helps inform the whole idea of a curative workplace, because everybody comes asking 3 basic questions. We come in, whether we know we're asking them or not, this is how it comes across. And that is, can I trust them and their intentions? Are they worthy of my respect? And then an all-pervasive one, am I safe?
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean I'm guaranteed a job, but it means, do I feel safe enough to be myself and to work?
Mm-hmm. Of course, we've had the term servant leadership around for a while, but you sharpen that, you hone that in your book, don't you? And you talk about the legitimate use of power, which is a very important concept to you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, sure. The phrase servant leadership is fairly well known today. It wasn't in 1977 when Robert K. Greenleaf, who was working at AT&T, really coined the phrase. And he and Larry C. Spears compiled together all of his writings and speaking into a book called Servant Leadership, A Journey into the Nature of Legitimate Power and Greatness. And that book was first published in 1977. It's still in print, and I highly recommend it. But in reading Greenleaf, it really impacted me because if we look at a leadership as a role of serving those who follow, it's quite different paradigm than looking at, though, hey, I'm on top, you are not. I'm the one who makes the decisions, you're the ones that carry them out. It's really more about the human side of working together.
Yeah.
And I think that Robert Greenleaf really highly impacted and informs curative culture. But I appreciate the way you describe it. I do think curative culture is a next generation, if you will. I think it is foundational in terms of servant leadership is foundational to the idea of curative culture. But curative culture really seeks to help tear down the wall between work and humanity. And I think that's something, particularly as we look at people who are made in the image of God. How do I look at them? How do I help them advance? How do I encourage? And also, how do I hold them accountable? Because I think that is a significant part of it. I just recently did an interview where the interviewer was saying, well, what you're talking about, Doug, is pretty emotive. He said, I'm a businessman, and I need to make sure that the bottom line is met. And I'm not really comfortable necessarily with all this emotional talk. I've got to get stuff done. And I responded to him. I said, I don't really think it's not one side or the other. Because a curative culture does not suggest a kumbaya company. It suggests really a company where people do have that sense of hope and opportunity to be excellent. Because I think excellence is such a significant part of what we owe in our belonging to the kingdom. And I think excellence is where we call people and they look at us and they go, why are you doing things as well as you're doing? And quite frankly, that's the question I'm always wanting people to ask. And the reason we're trying to strive for excellence is because of our faith. I think it reflects directly on the Lord and our belief and our adherence to Him and our love for Him that we are trying to be excellent at what we do.
And there's more we can learn from Doug Shaw, Avoiding a Toxic Workplace. That's coming up in a moment here on First Person. Here's Ed Cannon on the vision for FEBC's weekly podcast.
The primary purpose of Until All Have Heard, of course, is to share the experience that FEBC has because we have staff on the ground in so many oppressive places. But in addition to that, we're trying to speak to you in a way that only the kind of testimonies you'll hear from around the globe can do.
Discover how the gospel is making a difference around the world. Search for Until All Have Heard on your favorite podcast platform, or hear it online at febc.org. My guest is Douglas Shaw. Doug is the author of Curative Culture, Stepping Away from a Toxic Workplace. He, of course, is the owner and the leader of Douglas Shaw and Associates. And the book that you've written is for both the profit and the nonprofit business. I mean, these principles transcend everything, don't they?
Yes, and it was intended to be a book that someone could read who was in a nonprofit or a for-profit, but also in a faith community and not in a faith community. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't hide my faith. I mean, I'm very clearly, it is written with the idea being that I believe in God, our creator, and I use nature references, but I prefer to call it creation.
Yeah.
Um, my faith informs every aspect of what I write. On the other hand, I wanted to write it in such a way that someone could pick it up and say, oh, there's something here I could hang on to. And they may not be looking for a Christian or a religious book. On the other hand, people of faith will see faith clearly in the book.
Yeah, it definitely works both ways. I appreciate that about the book. I've always liked the concept, I don't know how practical it is, but I've always liked the concept of the upside down organizational chart. You know, the leaders at the bottom rather than at the top. That relates to this servant leadership and this legitimate use of power, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I remember talking with David Hubbard, one of the presidents of Fuller Seminary, where I attended. And I remember talking with him and asking him that very question. I'd attended a course with him as an instructor, and Max Dupree, who was the chairman of the board, former Herman Miller CEO. And I remember meeting with David Hubbard afterward at an alumni event saying, you know, Dr. Hubbard, you used the phrase legitimate power. Now, that implies illegitimate power. Can you explain that a little further? And he said, well, you've read Greenleaf, haven't you? and at the time I had not, and I couldn't even afford the book, actually. At the time. I didn't have a book budget. I was working at a nonprofit, and I just, I didn't really have much to go on. And I later purchased, or actually had the book was given to me by my assistant when I left that position, and everybody had signed it. And it moved me to tears, actually.
Yeah, and you've passed that book on to your son. I read about it in your book.
Yes, he now has it on his bookshelf,
which is powerful to me. Yeah,
in the office.
Yeah,
and he's got all my notes in there and all my scribblings. I dog-eared the pages. I have to say that for me, the search for legitimate power does resemble what you're saying, Wayne, about the upside down pyramid. Because the whole idea of curative culture is it does presume a certain adherence to servant leadership concept. But it also is looking at people in a way that says, I am going to do what I can to help you to accomplish what you are here to do. I'm going to help you by serving you, not by just making declarations or giving directives. I have seen so many people shy away from mandated directives as opposed to let's talk about why we want to do thus and so in our company. And let's have a context for it, and let's discuss it. Now, it need not be laborious because we don't have time for that. Everything's got a deadline when you work at an agency or a company like mine. We've got over 800 projects a year that we do for our clients. We don't have time to have a long, drawn-out conversations, but we do want to hear people's thoughts. And I think some of that when people feel like you're listening to them, it validates them. It says, hey, I'm important enough to be listened to. And a curative culture cares about other people's situations. One of the things I use as an example in the book, Wayne, is I worked for a guy, and when my father passed away, he was 68 years old. He died of a heart attack suddenly, and I was grieving terribly. And my boss said, "Hey, you're coming to work tomorrow anyway." And I said, "My dad just died, and I got to take care of my mom." And he said, "We got clients coming into town, and we got these reports have got to be done. So nobody's going to get them done but you." And I carried that with me, and I remembered that is not what we need to be doing to and for each other. When people have things happen in their life, and we all do all the time, there are things that happen to our kids, our spouses, ourselves. We have health-related issues. A curative culture realizes that and recognizes it and says, okay, you're off right now. You got to go take care of you. The rest of us are going to fill in. But when somebody else, your colleague, it happens to them, you and I are going to fill in for them.
Wow. Yeah. It's the way it should work.
Yeah, well, it's recognizing our humanity. And I think that's an important part of it. And again, it emanates from our faith.
Yes. Let me take you back to your dad. You mentioned him, and we talked
Yeah.
about that earlier, your growing up circumstances. If I may, he was a blue-collar guy, right? He was a stonemason.
Oh, yeah.
So what did you learn from your dad that you are thinking about as you write about a creative culture?
Well, what my dad, he was from the builder generation. I mentioned that he served in the military under General Douglas MacArthur in the Philippines. That's how I got my name, Douglas.
Okay, that's interesting.
But my dad was a hard worker. It broke his body to lift 50-pound concrete blocks all day long and stack them into a wall. It was hard on him, and it was something he always struggled with, but it was what he did with his third grade education, that's all he could do to make money. And he helped build a good part of South Seattle with his brothers he had trained also to become bricklayers. So I learned how to work hard. I would work with my dad and on weekends and in the summertime. And I remember the first time I got paid. I thought, really? You get money for this? And I was the hod carrier. I'd mix the mortar, and he'd be up there on the scaffold, and he'd say, I need more mud. And I'd have to mix it and haul it up there for him.
Well, that work ethic, that lesson is very important. Yeah.
I think that's what I'm really talking about.
Yeah. We have just a short time, Doug, but if someone's listening and they're in a situation where I want that kind of organization, I want to be a part of an organization like that. Let's say they're the leader, someone who can make a difference, whether they're at the top or the middle or wherever they are. What's a step they can take towards creating this kind of culture you're talking about?
Well, I think that's a real key question, Wayne. I think one of the first things I think someone can do if they decided that they wanted to learn more about establishing a curative culture is to really look, if you don't have a set of corporate values, to take some time and really craft them well. I think it all begins with values. Missions and vision are great, and we need those, but they answer a question, what do you do? Values answers the question, how does it feel to work in your company?
And as you say in the book, it's not about putting them on a wall someplace. It's about living them.
Embodying, embracing. In fact, if you don't embody and embrace, they will have no value even if they're on the wall. So I think carefully crafting corporate values and then adhering to them and letting people observe you adhering to your values, it carries more weight than anything you can ever direct someone to do.
Anyone who is part of an organization, whether in leadership or not, would benefit from reading Doug Shaw's book. We'll provide a link to Curative Culture, subtitled Stepping Away from a Toxic Workplace, in our program notes at firstpersoninterview.com. My thanks to Doug for joining us today. These weekly interviews are supported by the Far East Broadcasting Company, who are committed to God's calling to communicate the gospel everywhere through the use of radio and various forms of media. For 80 years, FEBC has remained true to that calling and continues to reach the unreached and build up the church in many parts of the world. Through a website and a podcast called Until All Have Heard, you can hear the stories of lives redeemed and changed for God's glory. Visit febc.org. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us next time for First Person.